The conference room fell silent as my father's face appeared on the screen behind me. 20 investors leaned forward, wondering why the CEO of Anderson Tech was part of my presentation. With our acquisition of Anderson Tech complete, we've secured exclusive rights to their distribution network across 3 continents. I clicked to the next slide, revealing the contract with my father's signature. A hand shot up. "You acquired Richard Winter's company? Nobody's been able to touch Anderson in years." I smiled, the kind of smile you perfect after a lifetime of being overlooked. Let's just say Mr. Winters didn't see me coming. They didn't know I was his daughter. They didn't know that 3 days ago I'd placed an envelope on his dining table during a Father's Day dinner. They didn't know his face drained of color as he realized the daughter he'd spent a lifetime dismissing now controlled everything he'd built. But I knew. And for the first time in 28 years, that was enough. My name is Alina, and this is how I became visible. I was 12 when I finally understood what invisibility felt like. It was Father's Day, and I'd spent hours making a card with construction paper, silver glitter, and a poem I'd written myself. My hands shook as I presented it after dinner, hoping this would be the moment my father would look at me the way he looked at my brothers. Richard Winters glanced at the card, muttered thanks, and returned to watching baseball. 5 minutes later, my brother Ryan tossed him a store-bought mug that said, "Number 1, Dad," and our father reacted like he'd been handed gold. "Now this is a Father's Day gift." He held it up, grinning. "This boy knows his old man." I stood there, my card still clutched in my fingers, glitter sticking to my sweaty palms. My mother caught my eye from the kitchen doorway, her face a mask of practiced sympathy. She mouthed, "It's beautiful," and gave me a sad smile before disappearing. That night, I sat on my bed and looked at the card, the careful lettering, the painstaking design. I ripped it into tiny pieces and let them fall into my trash can like confetti for a celebration no one was having. In our house, the hierarchy was clear. Jake, my oldest brother, was the charmer, the smooth-talking future entrepreneur who had Dad wrapped around his finger. Ryan was the athlete, collecting trophies that Dad proudly displayed as if they were his own achievements. And me, I was the afterthought, the awkward, artistic daughter who barely existed in her father's world. At dinner, Dad would lean in eagerly. "Jake, tell me about that business idea you mentioned." Or, "Ryan, that play you made in the final quarter was pure genius." When I tried to speak, he'd nod absently, his eyes already drifting back to my brothers. The message was crystal clear. They mattered. I did not. My mother tried to balance things. She'd slip into my room after these dinners, perch on the edge of my bed and squeeze my hand. "You're special too, sweetheart," she'd whisper, as if being special were something shameful that couldn't be acknowledged at full volume. But even she knew the rules. If Ryan wanted the last slice of pizza, he got it. If Jake needed money for a school trip, Dad handed it over without question. When I asked for a new sketchbook, Dad frowned. "What's the point? You'll quit halfway through like everything else." That cut deeper than he'd ever know. I didn't quit things. I was pushed out of them by his indifference. How do you keep pouring your heart into something when the person whose approval you crave most doesn't even bother to look? By 16, I'd developed a strategy. At family gatherings, I'd become the quiet helper, setting tables, cleaning dishes, making myself useful but never demanding attention. I learned to stay in the background of my own life, watching my brothers bask in our father's approval. "That's my boy," he'd shout when Ryan scored a goal, his voice carrying across crowded bleachers. He threw a backyard barbecue when Ryan made varsity. I served drinks and smiled politely when people asked, "And what do you do, sweetie?" Yeah, what could I say? I exist in the negative space of my father's attention. I am defined by his absence. When I made the honors program that same year, there was no party. Just a distracted, "Honors, huh? That's nice," mumbled between bites of toast at breakfast. I started staying up late, pushing myself harder in every class, not because I thought he'd notice, but because I needed to matter to someone, even if that someone was just me. I took part-time jobs to afford extra courses. I earned certificates, won quiet awards that no one at home acknowledged. At family dinners, Dad would beam with pride. "Jake's new startup is really taking off," he'd announce, "and Ryan's got scouts looking at him for the state championship." I'd mention my internship at the city's most prestigious marketing firm, and he'd nod, then turn away. "Anyway," he'd say, dismissing my achievement like an irrelevant weather report, "Jake, tell everyone about that investor meeting." The worst part, I didn't hate my brothers. They weren't cruel to me. They enjoyed the spotlight, but they didn't push me into the shadows. That was all Dad. And for years, I couldn't understand why. I tried everything. Being helpful, being independent, being successful. Nothing worked. Sometimes I wondered if he even realized how his favoritism crushed me. Other times, I knew he did and simply didn't care. The breaking point came on a rain-streaked Tuesday in April. I was 24, and after years of working nights and weekends, I had built a small but innovative digital platform that was generating serious industry buzz. The launch event was held in a sleek downtown conference room. Investors and local press filled the seats. I took the stage, heart hammering against my ribs, and began to speak about my vision. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen. People were listening, not just hearing me, but actually listening to what I had to say. After the presentation, handshakes and business cards came my way, along with murmurs of genuine interest. "This could revolutionize the entire market," one seasoned investor told me, his eyes bright with excitement. Later that week, our family gathered for dinner. My brothers arrived with their usual confidence, exchanging stories of victories and milestones. As dinner began, my father took his customary seat at the head of the table. The conversation flowed predictably. "Ryan hit his third home run this season," Dad announced, his voice swelling with pride. "And Jake, I hear you've sealed another major deal for your new venture. Fantastic work, son." I cleared my throat, attempting to insert my voice into the conversation. "I've just launched my own venture," I began, hopeful after the validation I'd received from industry professionals. But before I could continue, my father raised his hand in a dismissive gesture. Yes, we know you're busy, dear," he said lightly, as if I'd mentioned taking up knitting rather than founding a company. The room fell into a brief, awkward silence. My moment of triumph evaporated, crushed beneath the weight of my father's casual indifference. In that instant, something crystallized within me. A fierce clarity took hold. I realized that no matter how far I climbed or how many milestones I reached, I would never be acknowledged by the man whose approval I had craved for so long. As I looked around the table, at my brothers soaking up praise they barely had to earn, at my mother's resigned expression, at my father holding court like a king among admirers, I made a decision. I would build a life so brilliant, so undeniable, that he could no longer dismiss me. And if he continued to steal my moments, he would face the consequences of his endless favoritism. But I wouldn't fight for his attention anymore. I would make him irrelevant. The next day, I moved out of the city to a modest apartment and disappeared into my work like it was oxygen. The startup that my family had barely acknowledged became my obsession. It didn't pay much at first. There were weeks when dinner was toast and instant coffee. I took freelance projects on the side just to keep the lights on. On the hardest nights, I cried under my desk, questioning if I was built for this. But for every doubt, there was a flicker of determination burning brighter. I had no one clapping for me, no one cheering me on, but I was finally building something for myself. I learned to fix bugs, write pitches, handle rejections, and chase clients with the hungry determination that only comes from being perpetually overlooked. Some nights, I'd see social media posts of Jake at business conferences with Dad proudly at his side, or Ryan holding another trophy with captions about making the family proud. The familiar sting would return, but I didn't let it stop me. I'd take a deep breath, close the app, and get back to work. My success wouldn't come from applause, it would come from perseverance. And slowly, it did. After a year of 80-hour weeks and countless rejections, my company started gaining traction. Our user base grew steadily. A niche investor saw potential in what we were doing and provided seed money. I hired a small team, people who, like me, knew what it felt like to be underestimated. Together, we built something remarkable, but I stayed quiet about it. I didn't show up at family events with success stories. I let them assume I was the same invisible girl, living small in the background. That's how I wanted it. Because within me, everything was changing. My posture shifted, my voice grew firmer. I wasn't afraid to take up space anymore. I didn't need their validation. I had found something better. I had found myself. For the first time in my life, I made decisions without second guessing. I bought my first car without asking anyone's opinion. I signed the lease on a sleek office space with floor-to-ceiling windows. And I did it without needing someone to tell me, "Good job." I became the woman I had once only dreamed of becoming, the one my younger self thought she needed to be for them. But now I was doing it for me. And in that silent transformation, I was building something far more powerful than a career. I was building my freedom. I hadn't been home in almost 2 years, not for birthdays, not for holidays, not even for obligatory phone calls. The silence was mutual. No one reached out to check on me, and I didn't expect them to. But this year, I made a decision. I RSVP'd to the annual Father's Day dinner with a simple, "I'll be there," in the family group chat. Despite my absence, my mother had never removed me from the family thread, probably hoping I'd someday return. I'd muted it long ago, but now it served a purpose. The night before, I stood in a luxury car dealership, signing paperwork under a name none of them would recognize. I had legally changed my last name after launching my business, another detail they never bothered to ask about. The process had been simple enough, filing the paperwork with the county court while I established my company under my new identity. Next to me sat a small black envelope. Inside was a single legal document that would change everything. The Father's Day arrived clear and warm. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to remind myself who I had become. Confidence in every inch of fabric, power in every step. When I pulled into the driveway, the car's engine purred like a warning. I used the spare key I'd kept all these years, the one my mother had pressed into my palm the day I moved out, whispering that I'd always have a home to come back to. My brothers were already there, clinking glasses and laughing on the patio. Dad sat at the head of the table, drinking beer, grinning wide, playing his favorite role so well. His eyes flicked toward me, and for a moment confusion broke through his usual smugness. Then he smiled. "Well, look who finally decided to show up." Everyone turned. I could feel their surprise and judgment settle into the air like dust. I smiled politely. "Hi, everyone. Happy Father's Day, Dad." Dinner followed the usual script. Jake talked about his new condo. Ryan bragged about another promotion. Dad nodded and beamed like a king surrounded by princes. When the main course was cleared, I stood up slowly. The unexpected movement drew everyone's attention. "I brought something for you," I said, looking directly at Dad for the first time in years. Without waiting for a response, I walked outside, leaving the door open behind me. Moments later, I drove the luxury car into view, sleek, black, impossible to ignore. I got out, walked back inside, and placed the small black envelope on the table in front of him. "For you, Dad. Happy Father's Day." Gasps rippled through the room. "Is that a car?" Jake asked, squinting toward the driveway. Ryan leaned forward. "Wait, you bought that?" Dad looked from the keys to me, completely stunned. He picked up the envelope, his fingers trembling slightly. "What's this?" "Just open it," I said quietly, my voice calm and steady. Everyone leaned in as he slipped the paper out. For a second, his expression didn't change. Then his eyes started darting over the page, and slowly his face drained of color. His jaw clenched. "What is this?" he barked, now glaring at me. I gave him a long, unreadable smile. "Read it carefully, you'll see." With that, I turned, walked out the door, and got into the car. I drove away as the shouting started behind me, because that envelope wasn't just paper. It was the ownership document of the company that had just acquired Anderson Tech, the firm he had worked at for the last 20 years. His job, his pride, his status, all now under my control. What he couldn't know was that over the past year, my company had been quietly buying shares through various shell corporations. We'd leveraged connections with the board members who'd grown frustrated with his leadership style. The same dismissive attitude he'd shown me for years had made him enemies in the business world too. Happy Father's Day indeed. The house vanished in my rearview mirror, but I could still see what was happening inside as clearly as if I were sitting at that table. Back inside, my father's hands would be shaking as he held the paper, looking from it to his son's, his lips moving without sound. The panic would be blooming across his face, creeping through every muscle. "Dad?" Jake would ask, his voice suddenly small. He'd be standing now, coming around to where Dad sat frozen, the paper still gripped in his hands. "What's going on?" Ryan would already be trying to peek over their father's shoulder. "What is that? Is that real?" Dad wouldn't answer. His eyes would be glued to the document, his fingers skimming words he couldn't process. Finally, Jake wouldn't be able to take the silence. "Dad, what does it say?" Dad would look up, his face pale, mouth opening and closing like he couldn't catch his breath. It's a transfer of property," he'd mutter, his voice weak. "A reversal of assets, all of it, the company, my shares." "Wait," Ryan would say, "you're telling me this document means she owns everything?" The realization would hit them like a physical blow. The silence would deepen, not awkward this time, but suffocating. My father had always been the pillar, the one everyone turned to for stability. But now he would be the one on his knees, his empire crumbling before his eyes. His sons would have no idea how to process it. Jake would stagger back from the table, his face reddening. "How could she do this?" he'd hiss, voice rising in anger. "She's nothing. We're the ones who worked for this." Dad would hold up a shaking hand, his mind still trying to catch up with the magnitude of what had just happened. "She's not nothing," he'd say, his voice cracking. "She's everything." Ryan's eyebrows would furrow, his earlier cockiness replaced with uncertainty. "What do you mean, Dad?" "She owns it all," Dad would say, his voice barely a whisper. "She owns the company, everything I've worked for. It's hers now." The words would hang in the air like a death sentence. The sons who had once worshipped their father would now face a reality they could hardly comprehend. They hadn't even considered me as a contender. To them, I was the shadow, the forgotten one. But now I was the one who held the power. "I don't understand," Jake would say, his voice shaking. "When did this happen? Why didn't we know?" Dad would finally look up, his face etched with defeat. "She didn't want you to know. She didn't need to tell you. She doesn't need us." "But how did she get this much?" Ryan would ask. "She didn't ask for anything," Dad would say, his voice cold now. "She just took it." The room would freeze in disbelief, the reality of my quiet, calculated rise settling over them all. For the first time in their lives, my brothers would be forced to confront the truth they had been blind to for years. I was not the failure they thought I was. I was the one who had worked silently, without applause, without validation, and now everything they depended on was mine. My father would let out a long sigh. "She's smarter than I gave her credit for," he'd mutter, "and I'll never be able to take that back." I didn't look back as I drove away. The weight that had been holding me down for so long, the constant need to prove myself, the hunger for approval that would never come, finally lifted. I had made it, not because they'd recognized me, but because I had recognized myself. My phone buzzed with messages, the family scrambling, trying to figure out what I had done. I knew they were in shock, especially my father, but I didn't care. I had already taken what I needed from them. The power to stand on my own, to walk away from everything I had once thought I needed. I wasn't the girl they always ignored. I wasn't the daughter they thought they could control or dismiss. I was my own person now, free from the chains of their expectations. As the evening deepened into night, I knew they were probably still sitting there, staring at that paper, trying to comprehend its magnitude. My father, who had always dismissed my efforts, would now understand what I was capable of. But it would be too late. All those years of neglect had finally caught up with him. The house would never be the same. The balance of power had shifted, and I was no longer the one they could manipulate or overlook. The siblings who had always competed for his affection would finally understand that I wasn't just a side player in their world. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their love or their recognition. I had created a life for myself that didn't depend on them. I was successful, independent, and finally at peace. And when I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, I saw someone who had fought for her place in the world. Someone who didn't need to look back to know she had won. The door was closed. I had walked out. But I had also walked into my own future, one that was all mine. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever wondered why your achievements weren't enough while others seemed to win praise for simply showing up, I see you. The isolation doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means there's something broken in how they see. I'm not saying everyone should acquire their father's company as revenge, but sometimes the greatest achievement isn't proving yourself to others. It's recognizing your own worth when no one else will. Build your life not for their applause, but for your peace. The moment you stop needing their validation is the moment you truly become unstoppable. And trust me, they'll notice. Not because you demanded their attention, but because you no longer need it. The certificate in my hand felt insubstantial as tissue paper. The regional business competition award I'd been excited to share now seemed childish. "Useless girl, you were never the bright one," my father's voice carried across the living room, slicing through conversation like a blade. My relatives froze, wine glasses suspended, eyes darting anywhere but at me. The pride I'd felt evaporated, replaced by a familiar hollowness. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet as I stood there, exposed. "My name is Olivia Reed. I'm 31 and the founder of a tech startup. This is the story of how I forced my family to finally see me." Growing up in Columbus in the shadow of my brother Nathan had been an exercise in invisibility. Nathan was the golden child. My accomplishments were brushed aside like crumbs from the dinner table. "Dad, I was thinking about expanding the company into—" I began, despite the knot in my stomach. "Olivia, please," my father interrupted. "Your brother just secured $1 million contract. Can we focus on actual success for a moment?" My mother gave me a sympathetic glance, but remained silent. My Aunt Patricia patted my hand and whispered, "Maybe business isn't your thing, dear. You were always so good with your little crafts." Little crafts? My tech startup that had been growing for 3 years was reduced to a hobby in their eyes. I nodded politely and excused myself to the kitchen. My phone buzzed, a text from my business partner, Mia. "Did you tell them about the investor meeting?" I typed back, "Not yet, timing's not right." What I didn't say was that the timing would never be right in this house. My father had decided long ago that I lacked what it took to succeed. Too emotional, he'd say, not strategic enough. And my personal favorite, not CEO material. I rejoined the family gathering with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Little did they know, this dismissal was fueling something inside me that would soon force them all to see me. The next day, I arrived at our office space in a renovated warehouse. My company, NeuroSync, had started as an idea sketched on napkins during lunch breaks at my former software development job. Now we occupied half a floor with 15 employees and technology making waves in predictive analytics. Mia looked up as I entered. "That bad, huh?" she asked, sliding a coffee toward me. "Same story, different day," I replied. "Nathan secured some contract with the state government, and you'd think he'd solved world hunger. And meanwhile, we're just revolutionizing how businesses understand consumer behavior. Nothing important." "The investor meeting is confirmed for Thursday," she continued. "Westlake Ventures wants to see the new algorithm in action." "When it goes well," I corrected her, "we'll have the capital to scale up and take on Horizon Data directly." Horizon Data was our main competitor, a company that had rejected my job application, suggesting I look into something less technical. That rejection letter still sat in my desk drawer. Back at my childhood home, there were other reminders. Photographs of Nathan receiving awards dominated the mantelpiece. My graduation photo was somewhere in a dusty album, rarely seen. For 3 years, I had lived in a tiny apartment, eating ramen noodles and pouring every dollar back into NeuroSync. I'd started with my own savings and a small business loan, supplemented by an angel investment from a tech mentor I'd met during my time at Columbus Tech Incubator. I worked 18-hour days, all while hearing my father's voice. "Useless girl, you were never the bright one." The conference room at Westlake Ventures felt too warm. I adjusted my blazer and glanced at Mia, who gave me a subtle nod. "As you can see from our projections," I continued, "NeuroSync's algorithm has consistently outperformed market standards by 27%. What this means is an unprecedented level of customer behavior prediction." Gregory Westlake leaned forward. "And your competitors? How does Horizon Data's new platform compare?" Horizon's approach relies on historical data sets. Our algorithm incorporates real-time emotional response indicators. Simply put, they can tell you what customers did yesterday. We can tell you what they'll do tomorrow. 2 hours later, Mia and I stood in the lobby, still in shock. Westlake had not only agreed to invest, they wanted to lead a funding round that would value NeuroSync at $90 million. My phone rang. It was my mother, reminding me about my father's retirement party. "Maybe you can bring those cookies you used to make. Everyone always liked those." The contrast was almost comical. In one moment, I was negotiating a multi-million-dollar deal. In the next, I was being asked to bring cookies to celebrate someone else's success. The week that followed was intense. Days blurred into nights, as lawyers drafted agreements and press releases were carefully worded. Thursday morning, Mia burst into my office with a tablet. "Forbes, Business Insider, The Wall Street Journal. They're all running the story." My face stared back at me from the Forbes website. The headline read, "Disruptor Alert, Olivia Reed named youngest female CEO in tech after landmark investment deal." My stomach dropped. The announcement wasn't supposed to go public until after I'd had a chance to tell my family in person. I quickly scanned the article. Our PR firm had included my background in the press kit, apparently rushing the release to coincide with a major tech conference happening this week. As if summoned by my thought, my phone began to vibrate with messages. Colleagues, old classmates, distant relatives, all suddenly aware of my success. But nothing from my parents or Nathan. The silence was deafening. After Mia left, I called my parents. My father answered, his voice clipped. "I suppose you think we'd be impressed," he interrupted, "making a show in the business pages." "Dad, I built this company from nothing. No connections, no family support, not even a word of encouragement." "Now you've got your name in some articles. We'll see how long it lasts before reality sets in." The reality is that I'm now the CEO of a $90 million company that's changing the industry. This tech bubble you're riding will burst. Nathan's built something solid, something real. I closed my eyes, suddenly tired of the same old narrative. Sunday arrived warm and clear, a perfect day for an outdoor retirement celebration. I sat in my car outside my parents' home, watching guests arrive, people who had witnessed my relegation to the background over the years. With a deep breath, I stepped out of my new Jaguar F-Type, a congratulatory gift to myself that I'd purchased with a small advance from the investment deal that had closed just yesterday. The sleek vehicle was not subtle, nor was it meant to be. As I retrieved a small, elegantly wrapped package, I felt eyes turning in my direction. Cousin Drew stopped mid-conversation, his mouth slightly open. "Is that Olivia?" I handed him the keys. "Mind parking it for me? The driveway is getting crowded." My mother spotted me first, her greeting freezing as she took in my appearance. Gone was the practical daughter they were used to. Today I wore a tailored cream suit with a bold blue silk blouse, designer heels, and jewelry that quietly spoke of success. "Olivia," she managed, "you look different." I approached my father at the grill. "Dad," I said, extending the small package, "happy retirement." He turned, his expression unreadable. He accepted the gift with a nod but made no move to open it. "You didn't need to bring anything," he said stiffly. "I wanted to," I replied, maintaining eye contact. As I walked away, I heard one of his friends say, "Bob, isn't that your daughter who's been in the news? The CEO?" Nathan and his wife Jennifer watched me approach with poorly concealed surprise. "Quite an entrance, sis," Nathan said. "Nice car." Jennifer cut in. "We read about your company. It's very impressive. Why didn't you tell anyone what you were working on all these years?" "I did," I answered simply. "Many times. No one was interested in listening." Nathan shifted uncomfortably, clearly remembering the family dinners where my attempts to discuss my business were brushed aside. "Well, we're all certainly interested now," Jennifer continued. "Everyone's talking about that valuation, $90 million. I noticed heads turning at nearby tables when she said the figure. Whispers spread like ripples in a pond. "Thank you," I said. "It's been a long road, but the technology is revolutionary." Nathan cleared his throat. "I'd love to hear more about it sometime. My company might even be interested in implementing something like that." The irony wasn't lost on me. 3 years ago, I'd approached Nathan about a potential partnership. He had declined, suggesting I focus on something more established first. "I'll have my assistant reach out," I replied, the polite corporate response coming easily now. As the afternoon progressed, the dynamic shifted palpably. Relatives who had previously gravitated toward Nathan now sought me out, asking about NeuroSync, about what it was like to be featured in Forbes, about my secrets to success. My father remained by the grill, watching this transformation of his usually overlooked daughter with an unreadable expression. He had still not opened my gift, a custom-engraved watch bearing the inscription, "To New Beginnings. Love, Olivia." Eventually, my father tapped his glass for attention. He began with anecdotes from his years as an engineer, then turned to family acknowledgments. And of course, I'm proud of my children. Nathan, who's making his mark at Hamilton Financial, recently promoted to vice president. A polite round of applause followed. "And Olivia," my father continued, his voice faltering slightly, "who apparently has been quietly building something none of us fully understood." The yard was silent now, the tension palpable. "I always said she was the emotional one," he added with a small laugh. "It seems I may have underestimated how far that emotional intelligence could take her." It wasn't an apology, not even close, but it was the first public acknowledgement from my father that he might have been wrong about me. As glasses were raised, I saw something new in many eyes: respect. As the night progressed, I found a moment alone with my father. He stood at the edge of the yard, nursing a whiskey. "You haven't opened your gift," I said. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. I wanted to wait until it was quieter. "So," he said finally, "CEO?" "Yes." "Of a $90 million company?" "Yes." "And the youngest woman to do it, according to those articles?" "That's what they say." A long pause followed. "I don't understand it," he admitted. "This tech stuff. In my day, business was straightforward." "You don't need to understand the technology, Dad. Just understand that I built something valuable, something lasting." He nodded slowly, then gestured toward the front of the house. "That car? That's quite a statement." "It wasn't meant to be a statement. It was meant to be a reward for years of hard work." "Still," he said, his voice lower, "pulling up like that after all those articles, you knew what you were doing." "Yes," I admitted, "I did." 2 months later, with our funding secure and expansion plans underway, NeuroSync's new headquarters opened in downtown Columbus. To my surprise, my entire family attended the ribbon-cutting ceremony. My mother hugged me tightly. "We're so proud of you, Olivia. I'm sorry if we didn't show it before." Nathan approached next. "This is incredible, sis. I had no idea this was what you were building." "That's because you never asked," I replied, but without the bitterness that would have colored such a statement months ago. My father stood near the entrance, taking in the sleek architecture. He wore the watch I had given him, a small gesture, but significant. I walked over to him. "Thank you for coming." He nodded. "Wouldn't have missed it." "You know, Dad, all those times you called me useless, told me I wasn't the bright one. It hurt, but it also pushed me to prove you wrong." He looked at me, his expression a complex mix of pride and regret. You certainly did that. Yes, I agreed. I did. And in that moment, standing in the building that bore my company's name, surrounded by the empire I had built, I finally felt free of the need for his approval. I was Olivia Reed, CEO, visionary, and architect of my own success, and no one would ever call me useless again.